All right, our next speaker today is Peter Lom. Peter is the Air Resource Specialist for the USDA Forest Service, State and Private Forestry, Fire and Aviation Management in Washington, D.C. He leads the Wildland Fire Air Quality Response Program that provides personnel, technical specialists called Air Resource Advisors, smoke modeling, and monitoring capabilities to develop forecasts for areas adversely affected by smoke. Starting in 2004, Pete has led the Forest Service's national smoke management efforts by developing technical approaches and policies related to smoke impacts from both prescribed fire and wildfires. Since 2006, he has also served as chair for the National Wildfire Coordinating Group's Smoke Committee. Let's get the presenter role transition to Peter.
Okay, thanks, Diane. Hopefully, there we go. We can show my screen. Am I transmitting?
Yep.
Got it. Perfect. Super. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity today to present. And I have a challenge here in the fact that I've got to take on lessons from 2020. There were just a few, to say the least. And so this is going to go pretty fast. We've got 15 minutes and look forward to sharing with you where we were, where we went, and where we're going. So last year, literally, about a month ago, I started getting asked by leadership within the Forest Service a very obvious question to everyone, and that is, what was the intersection of COVID-19 and the potential with smoke, both in context of prescribed fire activities as well as wildfire. Our chief in the Forest Service came out with some very specific direction, kind of characterized here, that went out last year. And then basically the science and research that I pulled together with, which later got published with Kat Navarro from NIOSH. Someone is typing really loud and not muted. So the goal was to let people be aware of the potential exposure risks with smoke and COVID-19, the potential for increased hospitalization and potential worsening of outcomes. And that we may have a new group of folks who were at respiratory risk of smoke, those who were recovering from COVID-19 infection. Pretty serious context to start the season with. So in working with our partners at CDC, came up with a frequently asked questions document that is actually about to be revised right now in context with CDC about smoke and COVID-19. That is available externally on our websites with the program. You can see the links here, and we'll be working on that. So everyone is on the same page, although redundant to some folks like Brent and others. The program that I do run is the Interagency Wildland Fire Air Quality Response Program. We have a number of air resource advisors. Hopefully all of you have had that opportunity to work and take that on. And so with our air resource advisors, we do smoke modeling, try to put out smoke monitors as well, or coordinate that with the local air quality folks and units. We disseminate the information from that data, including interpretation, create daily smoke outlooks through a messaging effort, and then coordinate with a lot of public health departments, air quality regulatory agencies, and the impacted communities themselves. The goal is really about reducing smoke exposure. And truthfully, it is about smoke exposure reduction for both the public as well as the personnel. And that was a goal that we've been working with for a long time. We're under the planning section, and we've had a pretty broad spread of efforts. So last year, there started to become a fairly lengthy list of news media outlets that were starting to point out that particulate matter would contribute to a number of thousands of people dead annually, and that this with COVID could really be a significant concern. Some of you are ARAs that are on this call. Some of you have worked with our ARAs. So we've got a pretty broad background and obviously a fair amount of information that we try to disseminate and work with all of you all, FBANs, LTANs, IMETs, certainly in the community. As you can see, 2020, we increased the number of folks that went out last year. And I have to say thank you to our ARAs many of whom did 14, 2 off, and 14 on a number of assignments last year, well over 110, 120 dispatches. So our primary product that many of you have seen has been our Smoke Outlook. We had about 8 million views of our Smoke Outlooks last year in 2020, so it was a pretty big year. And in 2019, we were recognized in the congressional and the Dingell Act in specific for putting out and providing smoke projections from wildland fires. And so that's a direction to DOI and USDA to be doing this and to link with the teams, the incident management teams, specifically Type 1, but also we work with Type 2 and Type 3 as needed when we're requested. And a lot of folks last year, Type 2s was doing a lot of work out there, and we were with them the whole time as well. So in order to try and address this confluence of smoke and COVID-19 concerns, I had proposed a new structure of the response program. I'm up in the top left corner there as program lead, but we persuaded leadership within the Forest Service to support standing up a number of detailers to really get a jump start on addressing what ultimately became an incredibly busy year, as we all know. And so I had Josh Hall as the deputy program lead. I had Andrea Nick in a tech transfer specialist position. Brett Anderson, also in technical transfer specialist and analyst, and then Janice Peterson in the position as the smoke training and communications specialist. Janice has continued to do some work with us, as has Brett Anderson. I'll talk about both of their efforts in a moment, because that's continuing and part of the lessons from last year. And then in the middle of the season, we were able to finally fill the position for the National Smoke Monitoring Cache Manager, of which we have about half of her time, Amber Ortega. We've got about 95 folks that qualify out as air resource advisors or trainees at this point. And obviously, the smoke and COVID required a lot of coordination on an interagency basis, kind of outlined here. And we wouldn't be where we are today without our technical backbone provided by the Pacific Northwest Experiment Station air fire team led by Sim Larkin and all of the folks that support that team. So it doesn't work without a village, as the saying goes. Exactly what was the approach? So I put together a response plan, and we implemented this with an integration with Sim Group, R&D. There was a new smoke ensemble forecast tool to support better ARA forecasting. A COVID-19 and PM 2.5 fine particulate matter dashboard was created. You can access it here. We also launched with EPA the air quality sensor display and the pilot fire and smoke map pilot study, which is continuing this year, accessible by fire.airnow.gov, which I'll talk about as well. So these were really key elements in the plan last year and how we were communicating about smoke with the public as well as internally. It was intended to support both wildfire and prescribed fire applications was one of the goals, and some of the funding from the COVID emergency funding helped to support some of these efforts that we're talking about. A very significant challenge, because I was very focused on trying to put the program together, coordinate as broadly as I can, hire some folks, and address the key questions from leadership about this COVID smoke challenge. And we had to jumpstart preparation and training for our ARAs, to be familiar with these issues, and then also how do we address some of the challenges in the beginning of the season around remote dispatches, which really became a bane of our existence, to be completely honest. So we had some preseason training. We initiated some IMRR-like ARA community calls, incident management remote response type calls, every week, sharing experiences, sharing challenges. Those were highly successful. We usually had literally 60 to 70% of our community of ARAs on those calls. We also put out a weekly update email on the latest issues and information. In early April, I initiated some regional coordination with our Forest Service fuels community and air community on the challenges around COVID smoke issues. The goal was to build our awareness and our preparation at the regional levels. And then as leader of this, I wound up integrating not only with some of the leadership efforts within the Forest Service, but I had the opportunity to participate in innumerable incident management remote response calls at the ACIC level, Public Information Officer, PSC, logs, safety officers, and med unit. In most of those, I addressed at least twice a huge amount of coverage around the smoke issue. They kept on asking for more intersection and more presentations. So we presented and talked about what we were trying to do. Of course, being kind of an NWCG interagency effort, have to work with our friends over in DOI, and we had lots of coordination calls there. They are continuing, just as the effort is continuing within the Forest Service on these every other week calls. And then because this is so integrally tied to the health messaging and air quality messages, lots of coordination with others at EPA, CDC, NIOSH, and as well as NOAA, NASA, and even briefings at FEMA on the particular issues. We tried to do an implementation approach, which we incorporated in the geographic area wildfire response plans. All 9 GA plans had a wildfire smoke appendix, and set up some recommendations on how to use ARAs and how to consider smoke around daily operations, as well as public concerns, and what we could do to prepare for people to be ready for this intersection with respiratory health and smoke exposure. We have the NWCG Smoke Knowing the Risks video. It is still relevant and a valuable tool that if you haven't taken it and watched it, please do. And I urge everyone who goes out in the field in this still present COVID-19 environment to watch that video. So the program and its integration with Sim Larkin and his team, pulling the technical levers and making this happen, the fire and smoke map, integrated actually probably about 5,000 new low-cost air quality particulate matter sensors using EPA's algorithm to refine it for smoke impact. This was rolled out in mid-season, just as things were really starting to take off in California. And we got about 7 million views in the ensuing couple of months. There was a heck of a review process with state, federal, and local agencies and tribal agencies, and a lot of comments before we rolled it out. Lots of work done there. We also post our smoke outlooks directly on that, so that if you're geolocated to the nearest location of a monitor and you happen to be in a zone that's being forecasted for smoke, you have the opportunity to look directly at that smoke outlook. We had over 8 million direct hits, not even through this particular website, to our smoke outlooks, in addition to this coverage. So a lot of folks concerned about smoke last year. The media coverage on air pollution and effects with the COVID situation is one of those drivers. Last year, also in California, being such an obviously challenging year, about a couple of years before, there had been movement to regulate outdoor workers exposed to smoke. That regulation went final this past fall, but this was one of the other challenges that our ARAs were addressing. And in an environment where N95 masks, one of your most obvious mitigation strategies, were not readily available. So what other alternatives were there for protecting folks, or at least rotating people in and out of smoky situations? One of the challenges that was addressed by our ARAs last year in a number of incidents throughout California, Oregon, and elsewhere. Something arose in the middle of the season that was a really significant challenge to us, and that was carbon monoxide. Historically, we haven't really focused on the CO issue very heavily within the program. We've tried to go down that pathway. We've had some challenges in there in doing that. So all of a sudden, about mid-season, end of July, early August, we started hearing about folks complaining of symptoms with the smoke in a number of locations. Symptoms that are not characteristic of high particulate matter exposure, but of other gas exposures. So all of a sudden it started saying, now maybe we have an issue with carbon monoxide. And this wasn't just in, small spike camps located close to the fire line, but this was in camps that were 10, 15 miles away, or communities 10, 15 miles away from active fire, much further away than we expected. We had the team and the capability and depth to start pulling together a smoke carbon monoxide monitoring plan. We procured a number of dosimeters, thank you to NIOSH and some of their efforts to help us. We had our own cache that hadn't been used for a number of years when we first started looking at this, and then wound up shelving them. We were able to pull those out of mothballs, And we started sending them out and some guidance to our ARAs that were in areas where we had smoke issues. And we did definitely monitor some fairly high levels, well above ambient conditions for CO. And so messages started to be conveyed about this via med unit leaders, discussions with safety officers and others, California and Oregon especially. And we also grabbed the one Brad 57 Masimo carboxyhemoglobin measurement tool that was available out there and got that out to Creek Fire, which was one of the grand central spots for CO concerns and symptoms. The challenge is that some of these areas really were were not great clean air recovery locations with the presence of CO, as well as very, very high and consistent PM levels. Sometimes days at 1,500 micrograms per cubic meter, which is pretty high. And so this is literally was just a launching effort trying to respond in mid-season to a concern of what was going on. We are still assessing that data, and we are trying to figure out the best strategy for moving forward. One of the measures that we will be moving forward with, and the lesson learned, is it is important to be able to respond to people when they have concerns around carbon monoxide, lest the situation like this happen where folks are hospitalized on a fire. This is a CAL FIRE incident, a glass fire, with a number of folks concerned and one being hospitalized over carbon monoxide poisoning. So this is not an insignificant issue. It's not just the Forest Service's issue or the interagency community. There were whole communities being exposed to some of the levels that we were reporting. So we're trying to figure out how to move forward with this in a wise and efficient way. We have run afoul of some of the capability to deal with software use for some of the monitors. So we're trying to figure out the best way forward on this issue and how to build the protections that we can as we continue with dispersed camps and some of the other strategies that will be with us for a while to come. So the dispersed camps is another place that we learned a lot of lessons last year. The potential for smoke in spike camps, quite significant. Our monitoring with CO showed some presence issues above ambient, which definitely poses some challenges for rest and recovery. These remote camps pose a pretty significant challenge for our monitoring efforts. They are sometimes not easy to get to. And we needed to, definitely with just the general COVID and smoke challenges and respiratory concerns, we're coordinating much more directly with safety officers and med-unit leaders. But last year really hit a peak as we started seeing this really confluence of heavy smoke and really no one getting away from the smoke exposure. And of course, if you start talking about moving camps, which happened in a number of locations, several IMTs saw the smoke issue and the levels and moved people out of those smoke situations. Lots of coordination with logistics and other folks on the IMT. We have always had the goal of engaging on the fire personnel side as an ARA. This past year, lesson was really learned, and what we're moving forward with is that it was a dual function of providing public information as well as fire personnel smoke role from the ARA position. Truthfully, it's an evolving role. We're still figuring it out. But it is one that was embraced by a lot of safety officers, med unit leaders, and logistics folks that reached out to me post-season, and the interest in learning more about smoke coming out pretty heavily. The other lesson we learned was the challenge in the beginning of the season, where there was interest on some of the smoke and COVID challenges. When we were remote, that opportunity for, meeting a new safety officer, having a good one-to-one dialogue on some of these issues, which were challenges, it just really didn't work very effectively. It just doesn't, a phone call, the dialogue via Zoom, it just was not nearly as effective. So there's also, as part of that process, I mentioned Brett Anderson's work as a tech transfer focused. We had in Region 2, decision support was asking us about questions for longer range smoke forecast and what was that intersection with COVID activity in the state of Denver, Colorado rather, and in the Denver area, which had a lot of increasing COVID cases. So we started looking at how can we predict longer range using smoke forecast elements. And so Brett stood up something that Brent Wachter is pretty familiar with, and some of the others here. And I have several links here that you can look at, forecast maps, point forecast information at our various RAWS sites. And this is an experimental approach, which had, again, utility for both wildfire and definitely for planning prescribed fires as we look at some of these key elements. And so the forecast maps look at mixing height, look at ADI, LAVORI, other key parameters associated with the smoke dispersion parameters. And as people see declining ventilation later in a week, might not be the best time to do a prescribed burn or maybe even a burnout. So as we look at these tools, they are evolving. It is experimental, but it is getting quite a bit of use right now for planning around prescribed fire. And a dashboard was created by Brett to help everyone look at this ventilation index, mixing height, transport winds, so that there's some consistency across the United States in this run for 7.5-day forecast at an 8-kilometer basis. And hopefully, I do know that our units on the ground are definitely using this for smoke planning at this point, trying to judge when they might be able to do some burning later in the week. And we've been also playing with how to deal with QT diagrams and provide greater information and interpretation in an automated way so that folks are not intimidated by this fantastically important tool to our ARAs. But without being an ARA, how do you utilize it and when do you utilize it and when does it tell you information that's valuable? So in these specific RAWS locations, we do actually have estimated and modeled SKU-T diagrams that are created as well. So just so you are aware, it is experimental. We'll see where it goes. And Brett, who has helped lay out with Brent Wachter some of these parameters, we've got some resources that can help answer questions. So we're now in 2021. We've got the COVID with respiratory health challenges still in front of us. And still happening around us. We have definitely moved as an ARA and the response program into both public and fire personnel smoke roll. We do not have the COVID funding that was available in 2020, so we're going to be operating in a more probably challenged and less deep team of folks helping to drive the program this year. And then I just did want to put out that we will probably be doing an in-person ARA training in late fall 2021. Hopefully we'll be back to some degree of in-person training because it does really make a difference. And I mentioned earlier a couple of folks that are really key in this, myself in the leadership role, with Dr. Sim Larkin up at the PNW Air Fire team on some of the tools that are noted in this presentation. Brett, if you have questions about his weather forecast dashboard. And then Janice Peterson has been absolutely critical as we've been developing information and tools to have communities become ready for smoke. What's known as the Smoke Ready effort in conjunction with EPA, CDC, and other partners. There are a number of states and areas that are going to be doing Smoke Ready weeks in order to get the population ready for smoke in the upcoming wildfire season. So that's my show.